Okay, everybody, welcome to again the Lineage Cell Therapeutics third annual Spinal Cord Injury Symposium. My name is Joe Pantginis. I've seen many of you before. Obviously, this year is virtual. Now, very happy to have our first of two personal perspectives discussion. And I think we're going to have some very good insights and information sharing and hopefully looking to the future. So very happy to have with us today Robert Paylor. And again, my name is Joe Pantginis. I'm a managing director of equity research here at HC Wainwright and looking to get a nice little discussion going with you, Robert. So before we start, obviously we had a nice conversation previously, and I want to talk about some of the key themes that have been coming out of our discussion that I think are pretty poignant, and we'll get to those in a little bit. I think a key theme links nicely with last year's symposium, and that's regarding patient-focused drug development, or PFDD. I think that's something, especially in the SCI arena, that needs to be or see increasing focus, no pun intended, for repetition. And, like I said, linking growing forward, even though it's been slow, experience in treating SCI and all the components on the periphery have dramatic impacts on the life of patients such as yourself. So, as I said, I know we could see a few themes that we can touch on, but first was hoping you can introduce yourself to the audience and to the extent you are comfortable with your initial injury initial journey from the time of your injury. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Joe. I'm extremely excited for it and for everybody giving this space and allowing me to share this experience. I'm excited for just this discussion and what comes of it. But my name is Robert, and I live over in the Sacramento area where I was born and raised. If you can't tell, I'm a massive Cal fan, so I got the Bears everywhere and the blue and gold just running through my veins. So very proud of that. And I'm an inspirational speaker now. I go around sharing my story, talking about overcoming what paralyzes us on a mental or emotional level. So it's a wonderful career, and I'm excited to kind of share that patient perspective I've had through this journey. But in sharing my story and kind of why I'm here today, I was competing for the Collegiate Rugby National Championship for UC Berkeley on May 6th of 2017 when an opposing player made an illegal move and he broke my neck. I had the disc in between my C5-6 vertebrae ruptured into my spinal cord, and I had some fracturing at my C5 and my C6 vertebrae. That was my day, and I remember it very vividly. It was very difficult. The initial prognosis was not great. That I would likely never walk again. I would likely never move my hands. We'd be really focused on outcomes like being able to feed myself again. It was really difficult, and had to kind of start coming to terms with just this new life and the rehab journey. After that, I've started out with a C5-6 incomplete Asia B injury. I've had an incredible amount of progress. I've just been so lucky to have. So I'm now at an Asia D classification. As you can see, I'm moving my arms everywhere and have gained so much mobility. Really just wonderful, dexterity in the fingers. And I can walk about 500 yards in my walker now. So I've had some progress there in the lower extremities as well. And it's my honor now to be able to share that story with others and help them with their challenges.
No, I really appreciate you sharing a bit of your history there. And of course, seeing a lot of the recovery that you've had, especially with the functionality and others that obviously are trying very hard to get to certain levels as well. So again, talking on the different themes component that I was mentioning earlier, I guess let's talk first about your interactions with docs and centers, both initially and moving forward. And one theme I'll just sort of toss in at the same time was I think, you were fortunate in a couple ways, and I think it's fantastic. The importance of rapid intervention as
Mm.
one of the key themes there. How did you benefit?
Yeah, that's something that I didn't know at the time, but really served me in my recovery quite well. So when I got hurt, we were competing at the University of Santa Clara, which just so happens to be about 10 minutes away from Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. wonderful facility for spinal cord injury. So I mean that was something that helped me right away. Is this facility was ready to go with a fusion surgery, start stabilizing this region and figuring this thing out. So when I got there, I mean there was a bit of a time crunch. All those scans, MRIs, X-rays, CT scans. It took a lot of that chunk of time. So I had to make some decisions rather quickly. But in that was explained to by my doctor that we found research suggests that if you're able to have the surgery started within 8 hours of your injury, that your outcomes are increased, that your odds get better. So I was really, really lucky to be able to do that right away. And it's hard to know like where different interventions really serve in one's recovery, but I've had a really wonderful amount of recovery, and I got to think that that played a role in it.
No, that's fantastic. And I know, like you said, research suggests and what have you, there's been a lot of evidence to be able to get to it quicker, like you said, and
Yeah.
stabilize not only functionally, but also, from the broad inflammatory cascades that are going on there. And I know it's a really big help. And we could sort of have a forward-looking conversation towards the end of our discussion about, where do you think some of these positive components can go and where do you think some needs are? So just keep that in the
Mhm.
back of your head. Um, when we when we were talking, I think it's absolutely key, and I think you're a key example here. The critical components of the attitudes.
Mm.
Obviously, it's extremely scary when you have these injuries, the underlying attitudes that you have, both yours, but also, from a personal perspective, the personnel at the centers. How important is that? Obviously, I'm sort of leading the question there, but, like I said, both from a patient perspective who's just being faced with so much incredible, difficult decisions, and the personnel that you interact with.
The personnel is just huge. I mean, I talk a lot about now in my speaking like mental diets and really like being conscious of what's coming into our minds. And you're such a vulnerable state when something like this happens. You're really reliant on the quality of your care team and their approaches, their attitudes. And I think I try to talk a lot about like false hope and false hopelessness now when I'm discussing people who are dealing with patients who are in very difficult situations, when there are very significant odds that are stacked against them. A lot of the times, I think there'll be a lot of focus on kind of like the worst case scenario. And of course, that needs to be laid out. Like, what are the statistics? What are the realities? You need to be aware of everything that's coming there. But a lot of times it seems to get harped on like a little too severe. And in that, I can find a lot of patients where they get false hope or false hopelessness. And they think like, I just had this trained professional who's dedicated their entire life to really guiding someone through a diagnosis like this tell me that it's over. And they're not really having that attitude, that bit of hope that's required to really persevere through an incredibly difficult rehabilitation journey. If, of course, it's well intentioned, you're trying not to give someone too much false hope so that one day their expectations are just completely crushed. That can be a really difficult mental challenge, but it's riding that line of false hope and false hopelessness, which I think when I went to Craig Hospital, they did quite well. That they were laying out the odds, the statistics, what could happen. And then when it came to like, here's what's actually going to happen to you, they said, I don't know. I don't have a magical crystal ball under my desk. I can't predict the future. But what I do know is that you have our full strength and support. This team believes in you. And our goal is to maximize whatever recovery that's going to look like, whatever that is for you as an individual with your injury and presentation. So I think that was a really good strike in that balance where it wasn't false hope, it wasn't false hopelessness. It was just that steadfast support that I really needed. And that really fueled me to have that just a realistic expectation going forward, but that hope that was necessary to persevere.
So it's just again so important about just the delivery of messages. You
Hmm.
had again the real fortunate benefit of being near a real center of excellence. So it seems like they had much more training in how to deliver these messages.
Yeah.
And as we'll talk about later, about future views from a personal perspective, how can centers or hospitals that are say not excellence centers of excellence be trained to be able to address these things. So yeah, I mean, that's absolutely critical. So I guess, can you describe a bit of your journey, from the time of your injury? Obviously, you talked about the improvements that you made, but maybe a little
Mhm.
more specifics, what you did and the interactions with the centers that impacted the improvements that you've seen, from where you started, because obviously there have been major improvements.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. So at first, it was just getting my body stabilized and healthy, that acute phase. So I did have pneumonia very early on in my injury. That was very difficult. That was all consuming, and I wasn't able to swallow at the time too with all the inflammation in my neck. So you got kind of a one-two punch there. That was scary in the beginning, and we needed to get through that quickly and well. Monitoring skin sores, just kind of making sure that everything's going well, so that when I am stabilized, I can quickly get into that recovery mode and occupational physical therapy, and just when I get in that schedule of rehab. So early on, we were dealing with that. And then in Santa Clara, they were doing a stem cell study at the time, which I was offered and I was considering. I happened to move up to an Asia C classification at that time, which disqualified me from being able to participate in the trial. So we're kind of doing it the old-fashioned way, is essentially what it was. A lot of reps, repetitive movements, and a lot of Easton-based therapy that my body really responded well to. Where a lot of it, and in my free time even, my the medical director of Craig Hospital at the time, Dr. Balazzi, he just really encouraged me to, in my free time, spend time just trying to move things that aren't moving, and really just kind of starting at the top of my body, which was like shrugging my shoulders, which I of course could always do, like 20 reps, and then moving my way down that muscular chain of my body to where I'm not actually moving anything, but I'm thinking about it. I'm really trying to send these signals. This is something I would do probably 5 times a day, 20 reps each muscle. And from there, just trying to stay connected, keep sending those signals. And I've got to believe that might have played some role in my recovery. And it was those moments when I was just kind of sitting in my hospital room, and I'd look down at my hand, and I'd get just a little wiggle out of one of my fingers, or just a little wiggle out of one of my toes, and then could start, being able to justify to insurance, like show that, we got some motion coming here for longer stays, especially in
That's a whole
outpatient
other
therapy.
component. Yeah.
Oh, my favorite part, right? Insurance justification. So that was, that really served me well. And then when I was at Craig Hospital, there was a study going on. It was the NRN. It's called, I believe, the Neurorehabilitation Network, I want to say. I believe it was being run by the Reese Foundation. And I spent a very long period of time in there. I think it was about, I want to say, 6 months that I was able to participate in that, and continue to benefit from it, to where I was the time where I was in a really good spot, and it was looking like I was ready to go home, come back to California. So that's kind of, I hope that answers the question of my
No.
rehabilitation journey, and things, the interventions that we used.
No, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that's actually a great segue for my next question, in the sense that, look, the mentality component, going
Mm,
back to that, really contributes to this question. And, the topic really about patients' lived experiences and what we're going to do to look forward again. So, with focus on patients, you're at a center of excellence, okay, but still, it's not all, rainbows, and gold pots at the end of the rainbow. So
right.
what you talked about, the positive aspects. So, you can go back again and say, what did you experience positively? Obviously the approach from the physician that you mentioned,
Hmm.
what did you experience negatively? And, overall, and, this answer, I think, could be highly variable from different patients I've talked to. Where do you see the need for key improvements?
Mm,
I can tell you, like I said, I can tell you here, we'll probably hear a lot of common themes, but again, a lot of differences based on what's the physician like, what's his attitude, the center you're at, what are the nurses like, what are the physical therapists like. So functionally, positive, negative areas for improvement.
yeah, yeah. So in
Sorry for
terms
the
of
long-winded look
no, I
there.
love it. I love it. I love it. So, I mean, in the positive sense, like, and I think it kind of answers, like, the negative sense is oftentimes a lack of the positives. It's a real, like, human to human connection, very intangible. just when you're working with someone who really believes in you and you believe wants the best for you and is thinking in their free time of like what's different approaches that we can take, different rehab interventions, different tools that we can start using, adaptive equipment to be able to change my life and make me more independent. Like when it brought me back to that athlete coach type of environment that I had when I was playing rugby. It's this very team-based thing. We're problem solving together. That was really, I think, the most positive thing I can possibly share was just that real care and craftiness about caring. Like, how are we gonna overcome these obstacles and make the most of this? So then, of course, in a negative sense, would be sort of that lack where it just feels very sterile. Where just kind of showing up, making a paycheck. This is what I do. Maybe they had that purpose and really wanted that human connection when they were starting in this endeavor, but it can kind of get lost sometimes in just the busyness of life. So I think reconnecting with that often is something that's really beneficial for all of us to do, and especially in these careers where you're trying to help patient outcomes and do things that were one day impossible. So there's that. And then the other negative aspect is like evaluation day. Evaluation days, you can really enter into that like sterilized clinical environment where it feels like this relationship that you have it can go out of the window a little bit is how it feels. And like you're being judged sort of. And of course that's frustrating because so much of it is just outside of one's control. You do what you can, but in the meantime, like a lot of it is it's just how your injury is and it's how your body's responding. Those are things that you can't do anything about. And on the good days, it's wonderful. Those are really celebrated moments. And it's great to be able to track that progress and see how your hard work is paying off. That's motivating. But when there's stagnation, and I think that it's just kind of like silently ignored, then it feels like, you're just getting the answers wrong in a test or something. It's like you're watching someone grade your papers and mark you down. And those are difficult moments. So my advice, honestly, would be to like just address it normally and just kind of be like, that's okay, and then maybe like offer something like switching up a plan or, like adaptive equipment, just like things like that to be able to address it in different ways rather than just kind of being like, oh, well, you can't do it. So, and like just ignoring that. That's kind of like those are my negative days.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, you made the point. It's like having not to pigeonhole a particular profession, during assessment day, physical therapist or what have you, someone that's just dialing it in and even not necessarily having the right attitude to deliver certain results to you in a particular way. But then also, this is a theme also that has come up is you physically, variability of, time of day,
Yeah.
that you do the assessments. Is it consistent, or, if you had a bad night or what have you, something upset you, or how those things impact your assessments that impact, the people around you. I don't know. What impacts does that have on you?
Yeah, that's right. It's a good point because those are all really important for just how my body functions day to day. Those inputs are not recorded and they're not shared on those assessment days. Like how many hours of sleep did you get last night? Was it quality sleep? That plays a huge role in how my nervous system is functioning on a given day. How well did I sleep? Like even things like stress levels. Like if I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, my spasticity is going to increase, and it's going to make these days a lot harder. Time of day, of course, is huge. Now, oftentimes it coincided with just whenever my regularly scheduled like rehabilitation sessions were. So that was probably like the only thing that was really controlled, to be
How
honest.
common do you think that is, having just, regularly scheduled, PT time versus, say, other patients' assessments? I don't know, that might be too broad a question.
Yeah,
Just seems
I think
variable
it
to me.
Yeah, I think it probably depends on just when you're in like a really long-term program, you're gonna have that more like structured out schedule where it's like, okay, we're meeting 3 days a week at 3 p.m. and that's our routine and that's what we're doing. If you're doing something for many weeks and months, but I've also found in a lot of other situations where I'm in kind of like a shorter stint of physical therapy that, you know, it'll be like, okay, when are you free next week? And that's how things get scheduled. So that would be the variability. Of course, when I was at Craig, that was a long-term program, and when I was doing most of my assessments, so you know, it was regularly scheduled. But a lot of those other intangibles, I mean, it's one thing to, you know, like not have them be consistent. Sometimes that's just the way it is. But I do think it's wise to record that. It's important data, and it definitely, you know, it changes the outcomes.
No, absolutely. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. And I guess just to make sure I hear you correctly, because I don't want it to be understated, the comments that you made about physical components or how you slept and all those things,
Mm,
you're not asked about those things. Just want to
correct.
make sure we
Yeah.
emphasize it because I
It's
think
not
that
even just that it's
uh,
not recorded. Yeah, it's not even
not
asked.
recorded. Yeah, and I think that impacts a lot of results, whether it's, something that might impact, future therapies or approaches or what have you. I think that provides a level of variability or increases the statistical error bars or what have you, however technical you want to look at it. But no, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure we emphasize that point because I think that's something that needs to be improved upon. I hope you
Absolutely.
agree with that. Um,
Absolutely.
so we made the proverbial joke earlier about insurance and how fun that is.
Mm,
Could you maybe take a moment to discuss, obviously, you have your personal journey in your therapy and, approaches to levels of recovery, but discussing a bit of the intangibles, the
hmm.
costs, the insurance, travel, things of that nature that are not necessarily understood by the population at large, physicians themselves, nurses, physical therapists, but anything on the intangibles.
Yeah, the financial side of things is immense and so hard to gather together when you're going through a situation like this. And it's the last thing that you're really able to think about, but it's of the utmost importance. Now, for me, I was really fortunate. I got my injury in intercollegiate competition. So not only did I have my parents' insurance that I was using at the time in my early 20s, but I had a catastrophic insurance policy through the university. There was an NCAA policy. There was a USA Rugby policy. So this really opened up my options and put me in situations and places that I just simply wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't have all these insurance plans supporting my recovery journey. But even then, there's still a lot of things that those policies don't cover, and it comes from out of pocket. So one thing that I was very fortunate to have is my best friend's mom started up a GoFundMe page very early on, like 3 days after my injury, and it had some virality to it. We got a tremendous amount of support, and I really wouldn't have been able to go to Colorado and live there for goodness, we were out there for about 11 months that I was over there. And, you know, you got to have housing and, you know, meals and everything. And, you know, families kind of split in two. My brother was still in high school. So, you know, there's that. And when parents aren't able to work at the time, your income's going down. Like all these things just really start to stack on top of each other. And then, of course, like home conversions, car conversions, buying a new car. I mean, all these things add up. And you know, fortunately, through that GoFundMe, we were able to pay for those things that insurance wouldn't cover. But it was critically important. And I think that my team also just did a really good job of continuing to be able to justify that I could stay there longer and you know, find ways and plans that we were going to have to keep this progress going and to be able to keep me out there because. I mean, I'm trying to think like I mean it took me probably like 8 months before I was able to like get on my feet in a walker and start taking some steps without a harness. That's a really long length of time. I think what the typical inpatient stay is probably what, like 30 days, I would imagine. So, you know, being able to really draw that out in a longer, like intensive program for that amount of time, I think played a huge benefit. And I was lucky that my insurance was covering that.
No, that's fantastic. But again, highlighting a huge problem, not only for SCI, but a lot of medical indications for
Right.
that matter. But again, the the line is straight about where things need to be improved there. Um,
Yeah.
so my last question, I think, really talks about the point looking forward,
Mm,
based on some of the feedback that you just gave me and a discussion that we had, that I think brought up a very interesting point that may not be expected by many or thought of. And that was, patients, including yourself, views towards experimental therapies. Now,
Hmm.
you talked about it in the early parts of the injury, but you brought up some very poignant points about, say, maybe where you are now,
Hmm.
and once you've had an injury and any sort of progress over a longer period of time. And the time, like I said, the time from injury, what are your thoughts here and how that merges with potential for experimental therapies?
Right. Yeah. There's kind of like there's that risk reward that goes on in a patient's mind, and I think early on, you're a lot more open to going into therapies and studies, and here I am. I just passed my 8 year mark last May. I would be a lot more cautious for getting involved in something. I mean, when this injury happens, you're seeking a new normal, like desperately. You want to find some sort of sense of normalcy, and that takes a lot of time. And I've found that I have these passions and purpose in my life, and I've also just had such an incredible degree of recovery. I couldn't, there couldn't even be like a 1% chance that I would lose this progress that I've had. I mean, that would be soul crushing to me, soul crushing, and to have to kind of like start all over. So it's interesting. Like I was very, very open, early in my career to like, let's just try everything. I'm game. But now if I were to be approached, I would be, I'd be more cautious. I certainly want to be like in the first round of things. I would want to see like evidence that this is helping others. So there's that regard. But in the same regard, as we look towards the future, a lot of times I see interventions that are focused on like being used right away in the immediacy of an injury, but not like years post injury.
Right.
So in some ways, it does make me kind of worried. Like I don't want to get forgotten, and put in this place. Now, of course, I want everybody who has a spinal cord injury right now to have the best interventions possible, like do that. But in the same regard, I also want to make sure that me and, so many other people who are years post injury, have something down the pipeline for us as well. And that's something that I think about when I see a lot of the breaking news of developments.
Right. So, I mean, again, that's a very poignant point you bring up here, especially from the risk reward standpoint. And then also, like you just said, not getting lost in the mix with such focus on, acute injuries
Hmm.
versus the longer term. So, something to look forward to. And of course, you're very critical thinking there, Robert, in the sense that, I want to see some data, not be
Yeah.
it, the first one or two patients treated with something and not knowing what the safety profile is going to be. But
Hmm.
looking forward to a lot more progress there. And I think we're going to see more over the next few years. So not, too far over the long term. But with that said, your comments are incredibly helpful, interesting, welcome, and I'm extremely appreciative of them. And I know the audience is as well. So thank you very, very much for this, and looking forward to further discussion. So thanks a lot, Robert.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you, everybody.